All right. I don't know if it's possible to record on this thing. So, welcome to everyone who's here. I've never done a live stream before, and everything is pretty borked up right now. So, we're probably going to be able to do better next time. But for this time, we're going to see what we can do. So, I wanted to share with you some information that I've put together during the 50 States Project. And it's been really cool to look at each of the states one by one, see what's going on in a detailed level there, and try to zoom back out and look at the country as a whole. It's important to try and see what challenges we're going to face together as a nation, right? So I tried to put this map up, you know, like in the social chat. But instead, I'm gonna have to draw it because this is the worst live stream ever. Thank you, agroecological systems. I know that what I'm putting up right now, so hot. So let's talk about this. We're gonna start about it from the east to the west. And you know what? I'm gonna move back. I'm gonna give it a second to get this ring light looking less ghetto on it. Let's see, is it this one? Yeah. All right, we're moving back here. So if we want to think about where in the US are things going to feel different? In the US today, there are some like pretty well-known regions, and that's how the National Climate Assessment organizes it, right? Into 10 regions. But those regions are changing dramatically. We know that like the Southeast right now, this is a region where we're facing transformational change. If you've checked it in the National Climate Assessment, if you've looked at the regional forecast video. So where else are we looking at transformational change? And what are the challenges and opportunities if we look at the nation as a whole? Starting here in the East Coast, if you want to see a place that has some good opportunity, some relative stability, you want to be looking here at Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire. This part here, skidding a little bit into the higher mountains in New York, and like you can tell I'm doing this from memory. So if you buy land based on watching this video, something's wrong with you. I'm a woman drawing on a whiteboard with a marker. This area here has a very like true north potential. The relatively little change, cool summers, relatively cold winters still. It's going to be able to keep pests down. You won't need to do like a complete tree migration. You're still going to have functional maple ecosystems. You're still going to be able to have functional conifer ecosystems. And this sort of zone of conservation, this area where we're going to continue to have fairly normal patterns of life, fairly normal life ways, continues through New York into much of Pennsylvania and into the of Virginia through West Virginia. We have this wonderful place here. It really kind of goes out almost to the edges of Pennsylvania. This is like an iron band running through the country, all through the mountains here. This is some of the best conserved territory in the whole country is your higher elevations here. Obviously, there's that valley in central New York, right? This area is going to preserve summer chill. It's going to preserve a good winter. You're going to be able to preserve many precious ecosystems in here. These are where your national forests are that aren't going to burn, is in this area and down here. The Monongahela is unlikely to burn. The Alleghenies in New York, Pennsylvania area is unlikely to burn. Excellent. There will be some need for species infill to support changes as some plant communities move up in elevation, but we're looking at a good thing. So we have this spine here that is really two distinct bioregions where we continue to have some northern forest and we have some relatively preserved mountain area. And this spine is going to divide the East Coast and the north there in some ways that I think you will find interesting. So many people, when they talk about climate resilience, they talk about the Great Lakes. Like the Great Lakes are some magical entity that everything is going to be fine as long as you're by the Great Lakes. They are burning in Northern California right now, Mike. It's terrible. It's terrible. That's the kind of burning. The burning that we see in Northern California today is the burning that we will see in the southeast. And so we need to get ready now, Mike. So let me get back to what I'm talking about. I'm trying to monitor the chat. I'm really glad y'all are here with me. So if we look at this over to this, the eastern side of the Great Lakes, we have a distinct climatological zone that's going to form up right about here. It's going to split Michigan. It's going to take northern Ohio, and it's going to take inland New York. And this is sort of like a warm lakeland. If you think about Virginia, what Virginia used to be like 200 years ago, maybe, it was a mild winter, fairly warm summer, a very fertile area, definitely a habitat that humans want to live in. That's what you're talking about with warm lakeland. But you might notice that's very different from today, right? Some of the biggest change in the nation is going to happen in a few places right along the lakes, like right around Buffalo, right around Detroit. It's going to be tremendously warmer in the summer than it is today. Where, like this analog to Virginia, you can see that's a good deal south, right? There's more relative conservation, and I'll talk more about this as we work our way west. If you look over here, this is like a cool lakeland area, and frankly, it is cool. This is the area where if you're sort of more cold loving like me, you're going to want to stick over to the western side of the Great Lakes. The western side of the Great Lakes has more ecosystem conservation and more like you'd expect today, particularly in this area around Door County, including Green Bay, and up here around Duluth. These are like super good conservation zones for people who like a fairly traditional Midwestern climate. So we got this warm lakeland we talked about on one side of this like ridge of stability, and then here, and this is a not big. This is not big here, including Massachusetts, including New York, including an enormous amount of the American population. You have this warm coast area. This area is going to change enormously. It's looking at maybe 6 weeks of additional growing season a year, which is not entirely good, right? Like that's so big. You're expecting to see some landscape transformation. You're expecting to have to grow completely different kinds of plants. And it's because of the level of interaction with the ocean. Right over here, we're on a very shallow continental shelf, and the changes that will be happening to the seas are projected to be substantially more horrifying than any changes that will occur on land. So you're touching the ocean too much here. We're not talking about an environment here that is going to be like too hot for humans to live, but it is going to be very different. Survivable, but very different. Just like how warm Lakeland, totally survivable, but very different. And that brings us to what is going to be feeling like America's South today, right? If you think about where the South is now, I think of it starting, a little bit in Southern Virginia. It's coming up under the RCP 4.5 scenario. It's going to be about halfway through New Jersey is the new South. It's pretty intense, right? And so the new South is going to like take over here in all of these states like Kentucky, Tennessee that are like southern but kind of their own thing. Their climate is going to be much more like typically southern, like southern Illinois, Ohio, southern Indiana, much more typically southern than they are today. If you're looking for places where you could do, like a Georgia style garden, a Georgia style gardening from 10 years ago, you're going to want to look at moving up into Tennessee or even into southern Ohio. Ohio to me is very interesting. It's like totally leaving the Midwestern ecosystem. It's turning almost completely into this new, like modified Virginia ecosystem in this new expanded South ecosystem. And this is not as bad of news as we could be dealing with because we have ecosystem analogs south of here that we can move up. And if you look at the USDA tree atlas, you'll see that for these states, there's a lot of infill recommended. There's a lot of things that we can move up. You're going to be able to have a nice magnolia, rhododendron dominant plantings in these areas, and they're going to look great. And what's going to happen down here where that used to be the normal thing, right? like we've talked about, this is New South. And excuse my terms. I don't mean to like make light of things, but like if you like the South and you want more of it, this is like mega South coming down here. Like if you like being really hot and humid and having excuses to day drink because it's not possible to work outside, Mega South is for you. It's, there's gonna be some days where the wet bulb temperature probably approaches the limits of survivability. And I think that it's unusual that these wet bulb heat events are presented like everyone's gonna immediately melt, because we hit those temperatures in a variety of places around the world today. We've hit wet bulb in India over those terrible heat waves that they've had this year, this calendar year, and not all of India died. Right? It was terrible. No one was enjoying it. But these short-term events, populations can survive them using tools that we've developed, like air conditioning, which can be very energetically efficient, and we're not talking about it being for so many days a year. You're talking about like 5 to 10 heat emergency days a year. If you like Florida, if you're a person who lives in Central Florida, you're going to want to check out New Florida. So there's like New South, right? Up here all the way into New Jersey. New Florida is going to have a very similar climate to what Florida has had before. You're going to have potential for subtropical agriculture like orange groves there. It'll be good. And if Florida is not enough for you, if you want a Florida that is more Florida, this area is turning into like kind of a mega Florida. It is becoming a true tropical environment, which is really something that used to only exist down here at the very southern tip. You could grow mangoes in like the very southern edge of Florida and in like the Keys. It's coming all the way up here. And there's a sad truth that the Keys are being lost. The Keys are going under with sea level rise. And there's a lot of stuff that with the sea level rise I thought would go under that it didn't, but the Keys are going down. And it makes me sad. But the only hope I can see on that is that the habitat, this whole coastline here, it's turning into like mega Florida. You could get a lot of the Keys ecosystems potentially migrating up if you wanted to. And anyone who has worked with this sort of like true tropical ecosystem, that stuff grows super fast, just super fast. This is a problem area I want to point out. It's not going to be so different in nature, in terms of your plant hardiness zones, in terms of your length of seasonality, as the rest of this sort of sweltering hot zone. But this is where your biggest threats are due to sea level rise. So locally here, you're going to have more feet of sea level rise than in other parts of the coast. This area is very vulnerable to sea level rise, and unfortunately here around the tip of Massachusetts and in Delaware, it's really bad in Maryland and Delaware. But this is where the most conservative financial estimates, the most conservative estimates by insurance companies say that we're going to lose tens of billions, like as many as $300 billion in real estate. So if you have holdings in Houston, or if you have holdings in New Orleans or Southern Louisiana, you should pay attention to this science. In the next 20 or 30 years, these are areas where not only will we see direct disruption from sea level rise, we will see probably very serious infrastructure impacts. As we continue to move west, don't go here. Southern Texas is an incredibly dangerous place. Kiowa, there will be a lot of flooding, but we will. I'll get up to Minnesota in just a minute, okay? I'm sorry. This part of Texas is going to be so hot that if you want to talk about places where humans like should not go, this is not a place to go. And unfortunately, this brings us to our areas that are truly, you need to try to move. You need to try and find a way to get out of much of the Western United States. There are exceptions to this, of course. In Colorado, we have one of the most powerful sort of sky island nation states. So let's hope we stay the United States. that's going to emerge. In Utah, if Utah can stop letting its like deadly salty lake dry up, very powerful potential for Sky Island status in the Wasatch Mountains. And they don't have to let that lake dry up. They have more than adequate water. They could shift things around. And down here in Ute territory, in northern New Mexico, also really good Sky Island territory. But other than that, like, I'm really sorry to say it, we're gonna see intense desertification all through here. All through here. Tip of Northern California is gonna be okay. This is where we're sure to see incredibly intense desertification. People will be able to live here, but they're gonna need to have a very different lifestyle. A little bit more. Mike, I know they wanna pump water in from the Pacific, but like I don't think they're going to be able to do it. I've been reading a lot about desal technology. You know, they have almost everyone is drinking desalinated groundwater in Texas right now, which like that's a great plan, right? Because we have a already unsustainable resource that we're going to have this energetically heavy way to get it out of the ground. I think that you're going to have coastal desalinization to keep Los Angeles and the Bay Area going. But I mean, like people who live in the Bay Area, they're already paying $7,000 a month for living in a tiny apartment, and now you're going to pay $20 a gallon for water. I think that that is terrible. Salt Lake City has a lot of great aquifers under it, which is part of why its problem with the Great Salt Lake is particularly ridiculous. We're going to talk about Minnesota. I promise. Everyone wants to talk about Minnesota because it's fantastic. This whole area, if you have friends or loved ones who are like, oh, I'm going to move to Phoenix because the property values are good there, they're not good. This whole area has very serious problems with desertification, and it could extend farther east. You know, when people began making the maps of North America, when English speaking people started coming in and making the maps, this whole part, which I'm going to draw here, this was the Great American Desert, right? When we came with the steel plow, we were able to like break up the prairie, we farmed it, but also we've been in an unusually wet period for Kansas, according to all sources of historic truth, like tree rings and stuff. This area over here, we have increased precipitation on this side of the line. Over here, we could see desertification extend this far out. Oklahoma is doing a fantastic job of fighting the desertification to keep it as far west as possible with cover crops. And if you're in this area, it could remain agriculturally productive. I think we could keep these states right to the panhandle. I think that we could keep them agriculturally productive and good places to live. But the soil preservation is going to be absolutely critical. So you can see we're working our way up north. We're working our way back to the good stuff. I have to talk about this sad stuff for a little bit. This is an interesting band here as we're working our way into the good stuff. There's this little band that goes through central Illinois and Indiana where people are going to tell you, oh, nothing has changed because there's going to be very little difference. There's this little island of stability here. So if you really love living in Peoria, you have lucked out. You are in a great place, Peoria, Illinois. This line here, you'll notice this line is kind of going across the nation. Below this line is where we'll need to make major shifts in agriculture if we're going to continue production. It's pretty close to the 42nd parallel. And you'll see references to the 42nd parallel in a wide variety of climate literature. But you know, some people act like we're going to die below the 42nd parallel, which I think is ridiculous because people live in equatorial portions of the globe today. Portions of the US that fall below this line will experience landscape transformation. They will be very different, but we'll have to adapt to life in a truly hot climate. Today, even the southern tips of Louisiana is like the coldest part of the Caribbean, right? So we've got a ways to go. So let's get up here. Let's get up north of the line. This here is my favorite part of the map. This here. Start in eastern Montana. Get the Dakotas. You get a fair amount of Nebraska, you get all but the southern tip of Iowa, you get northern Illinois, you get northern Indiana, you get part of Michigan, you get the Upper Peninsula. This area, if you like traditional American agriculture, if you want to use permaculture skills that you've developed in any other part of the US, you want to come up here. You got very good land values here. You can still get a house, sometimes with 1 or 2 acres for under 150,000 in Iowa. And if you want help knowing what communities are good, I introduced myself in context to my previous work. I did 6 years of ethnographic work in the schools in Iowa. This Eastern Iowa, I know the whole area very well. I can tell you where there are hate groups to avoid. I can tell you where there are just fantastic people. And let me tell you, it's 95% fantastic people. But getting into this is the growing stuff zone. This is where we're going to be able to grow conventional food crops, shift towards hot weather crops. I made a video about that last week. But here's where we're going to be able to grow legumes in North Dakota. We're going to be able to continue to grow corn in South Dakota, continue to grow corn in Iowa and northern Illinois, although I think that will probably become highly urbanized, and in Minnesota. The corn belt in Minnesota is going to move up. It's going to move up this high. Everyone paying attention to Minnesota? All right, I know you are. I know you are. If and you like it cold, which you do because you're from Minnesota, stay up here by Duluth. Duluth is still relatively cheap, but if you look at the big money, people are starting to invest in it. In Duluth, you're still going to get probably less than a month over 86 a year. It's pretty good. If you want another place that's going to maintain a cool summer, over here by Green Bay, Wisconsin is also really good. But the Great Lakes, they're not one whole story. That's like there's a, imagine that there's a wind blowing across the lakes, right? It's going to be cold here, and then the lakes are like picking up the heat and they're blowing hot over here. They're going to blow hot over Buffalo. Buffalo is going to pick up like 6 weeks of growing season. But if you want the traditional cool, which I do because I like to keep the pests down, you know, I like to use no chemical pest control. I just encourage more bugs to grow and eat other bugs. So for that, you really need a good cool. In Minnesota, if you know Leech Lake, you want to get north of Leech Lake to have a better chance of reduced wildfire action. That's the challenge with Minnesota. Minnesota is going to be good. Get north of there in Minnesota, you're going to have a cool time in terms of the summer temperatures. There's hope that the North Woods, particularly here, this is the part that's least likely to burn, is the north central part. Stephanie, this is for 2050. This is too close, man. This is too close for people not to be talking about it on a national level. And it's 2050 from information in the National Climate Assessment, which is a federal report that took millions and millions of dollars to make, and that they spent no money communicating to the public, which is why I'm doing this. So, anyone got any specific Minnesota questions before I move on? I see we've got a question about Lake Superior flooding ever, right? The lakes are likely to pick up more water. The rain patterns are increasing on this whole part of the country. We're going to see as much as 15% more rain mid-century. Unfortunately, a fair amount of it coming in the spring, which is going to interrupt planting, which is going to make permaculture more important than ever, right? Because if you have perennial crops and self-seeding crops, you don't need to get out there when the ground is wet, and they're going to be able to come up just beautiful, right? I am not worried myself about like the lake flooding and coming up over the land too bad, because there is such an effective drainage network, and because in this whole area south of about the 42nd parallel, with the increased heat, there will be increased moisture needs in the soil. So the network of watershed coming out of the Great Lakes, there will be more water in the lakes, but it needs to get down into the watershed. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. I I certainly acknowledge, though, that flooding is a huge problem. and developing flooding resilience is a big deal. So coming out of an Iowa perspective, I don't know if you guys remember in 2008 we had like these insane floods that destroyed Cedar Rapids, which Cedar Rapids is a fantastic town right about there that gets destroyed by a natural disaster as often as if it was ruled by a second grader playing SimCity on sadistic mode. They got flattened by the derecho very recently. They lost 50% of their tree cover. They have been crushingly flooded on multiple occasions, and they always bounce back. They're a very resilient city. From the 2008 floods, we developed a lot of new flooding technology which uses green space and getting way back from the river, going way back farther from the river. Shay, I'll talk to you about the Wisconsin fire outlook in just a second. Wisconsin's fire outlook is not as bad as Minnesota. But with the type of redesign that like Dubuque is the national example for a flood resilient city, by creating broad green space by the river, removing infrastructure by the river, and just letting the city flood more, they stopped totally crashing out all the small towns south of there that couldn't do infrastructure repairs. Stephanie, Northeast Ohio will not be perfect, but it won't be the worst. No, you'll be able to survive there. It's going to change a lot. You should watch the Ohio video because that I think is an area that is having agricultural zone shift. Shay, with Wisconsin, the area where I would be more worried about the fires is over here, actually, the area that's coldest today because it's close into that like zone 3, almost historical zone 2 with Minnesota. And you will have fire activity here in the UP. This part of the UP is warming faster. But I think you're going to have good protection against fire. And I've looked at a variety of infrastructure maps in the rest of the state as a whole. And Wisconsin in general is pretty low on the fire danger spectrum. If we want to talk about where fire danger is just for a second, there's going to be a lot of fire danger in this part of Ohio, in the Wayne National Forest. I'm sorry, Stephanie, but it's you should know about it. This is a forest that's already experiencing mass tree death, and you should expect there to be substantial wildfire activity in Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, and southern Missouri. Colin, I'm so sorry to hear about the Virgin Islands. The hurricanes, if you don't mind looking, if you want to download the National Climate Assessment, which I have a link to it in almost all of my videos, it is in my viewer on page 1492, rememberable number, right? In the National Climate Assessment, you can see the hurricane path projections. They don't look good for the Virgin Islands, but the biggest concern for the Virgin Islands is the loss of water. It looks like the rainfall is moving away from there. So, talking a little bit more about the rest of this map here, because I know that in the Pacific Northwest, we tend to have a lot of people. Uh, oh, Kiowa, Hawaii is looking really rough. It's really sad. I'll come back to the islands in just a minute, okay? But following the rest of the map over here, we have in this region some unusual patterns forming up where we anticipate relatively low levels of change here. Over here, relatively low baseline change. And I know if you live here, you're laughing because you've experienced some very hot years, right? But over here, you will get years in 2050 that feel like a good year in the last 10 years. So that's nice to know. There is going to be a higher frequency of disaster events, though, than like anywhere else in the United States. And it's all coming out of here, the terrifying zone of chaos. This place is terrifying. If you go and you look at the data sets as they overlay for this area, it's just like going to be insane. The storms there are going to be beyond life threatening. And I'm the kind of person who I know a storm is good if it makes people who aren't from the plains like cry and hide somewhere. This is an area where fortunately it's not highly populated, but people, if they want to stay there, they're going to need to develop just incredible storm resilience and incredible flood resilience because centered in this area, the stream flow is going to change incredibly. Most of this area here, the whole area, right, is fed by snowpack. Their streams are snowpack fed. They normally have stream flow peak in like July or August. It's going to peak in March. It's going to transform the entire ecosystem because the spring thaw is going to come so fast and so hard, and it's going to change the hydrology of the region massively. Over here, though, you won't have the same intense hydrological changes. Up here in our extremely badly drawn, but it's not because we don't love it, Puget Sound area, uh, this area is going to be so fortunate. This area is one of the least vulnerable to sea level rise. I've been shocked how low the vulnerable it is to sea level rise there. And I love, I've learned recently that gray whales have established a permanent population in Puget Sound, which is like the whales have found a backup place they're going to hang out there. And I know that the good people of the Sound will take care of them. With everything that's going on in the oceans, knowing that other living things are finding places of refuge is a great comfort to me. So, we're getting some questions about Alaska and Hawaii. So, Hawaii deserves a huge amount of recognition for the work that they have been doing to fight climate change and build resilience. Hawaii has pulled out all the stops, and they can't do it alone. Unless we get emissions down, Hawaii is going down. It won't be completely flooded, but the reefs are going to begin to bleach out. They have very clear information about when that's happening. The reefs are going to bleach out around the Big Island by 2030. Between 2030 and 2040, we're going to lose the Hawaiian reefs, despite the heroic efforts of the people of Hawaii. So I think we should listen to the Hawaiian people and stay out of there. You know, we should let them try and do what they can to fix it. They're doing a lot to try and breed hot weather coral. You know, we have to have hope. And, you know, I hope that God will see Hawaii and all of the work that is being done there. Alaska is a different story. Alaska, it's just going to be crazy there. Now that I can make videos where I'm able to put visuals in, not like this, these visuals are terrible. Alaska has extreme state level variation in outcomes, where the melt rate is very different across the state, and what's going to happen to the permafrost is a real undiscovered country. They anticipate that a lot of land will open up for agriculture in Alaska, although people have been doing that now and producing more like barley crops now. And like the earth just melts beneath your feet. You get tractor sized holes in your fields. So it's going to be a high risk situation in Alaska, but also very high reward. I prefer a lower risk situation. I'd stay here. If you like kind of a rugged, self-reliant lifestyle, you can get an excellent land deal still in this area. If you like area where like maybe there's a chance you're still going to be able to get fried foods and have a cheese-based lifestyle, because you don't have to be fake. You want to have a cheese-based lifestyle. Most Americans do. You stick over here. You hug the lake. You're going to be able to continue to live in some decent cities. The Twin Cities, I think, are going to be an emerging powerhouse, and so will Chicago. All right, I'm going to scroll up for a second because I'm sure that I'm missing questions here. Oh my gosh. Oh, my mouse died. This is the lamest live stream ever. I'm sorry, guys. I'm so glad that you're here with me. All right. Minnesota fire outlook. The best place in Minnesota to live long term is going to depend on your cultural fit, I would say. I think that if you like a funky urban lifestyle and you like living in a place with a lot of diversity and culture, you should go to the Twin Cities because I think they're going to be a continual powerhouse. I think that it's not going to get bad enough there that you'll do anything more than complain about the summer heat. You're going to have access to a wide array of resources from this broad agricultural belt. And there's going to be the type of infrastructure in hospitals where you're not going to die. That would be my pick for the Twin Cities, is to go where there's other people and resources. But that's because I'm trying to give you reasonable advice. I live in rural Iowa in a town of 90 people because that's the lifestyle that I enjoy. What state would you pick for survival in 2050? There are a lot of states where you will survive. And I feel like that's an important message that gets lost in sort of the doomerism of the climate world today. If you want to pick a state where you can survive in 2050, you can definitely pick like anything north of this line. You're going to have a pretty normal lifestyle. I honestly think that except for in the West, where there's going to be this like intense water scarcity outside of the Sky Islands, I think most people will survive. I think there's places where many people are going to have to move. I think that in this densely populated eastern seaboard region, where we have like a lot of people and very serious resilience threats, a lot of people are going to have to move. That's part of why I'm not as big on this like warm lakeland area as I am by the cooler side of the lake, is because all of these people are going to need places to go. So like the population density is going to spread out there faster than it'll spread out over here. I think that your best bets, if you want to have just like the real shorthand, where are the best places to go, best quality of life in 2050? Duluth, Green Bay, kind of writ broad as larger areas. Colorado, although I don't know anyone who can buy into Colorado at this point. And get yourself a ways inland here, kind of into the Willamette Valley. The Palouse, I think, is like a pretty cool bet, actually. I've had a lot of people asking about it. And the more I learn about it, the more I like it. Stay away from the coast, though, because the changes to the ocean are so bad. And because, according to all tribal records, we are way overdue for a tsunami that's going to mess up the infrastructure. And I've tried to make it clear before on my channel that that is an area where I'm more concerned than is rational. Like, I have a problem with tsunamis. If you're not concerned about tsunamis, the coast there. Enjoy it. That's why I live here. I live in a safe tsunami-free zone, and I would recommend in many ways getting a little further away from the ocean if you want to reduce your risk of exposure to many factors. Maya, I hope that that answers your question. And Mike, we are looking at projected reduced rainfall in Hawaii. The reduction in rainfall for Hawaii, as the other US Pacific islands and the islands in the Caribbean, is a major problem. So I feel like I've been going on forever. Oh my gosh, I have. I've been talking for like 40 minutes. I can't believe you were all here with me for this time. I'm completely touched. It really matters a lot to me. And I'm going to get better at doing these, I promise. Does anyone have any other questions? Or I'm going to get off and stop embarrassing for myself for a while. I'm not seeing anything. Hey, don't worry, I'll be back and I'll embarrass myself more. I promise. I'm going to put up a version of this video that is less me scribbling here and more me like working on an actual map that I made, which does look terrible. If anyone on this stream is like a good artist, you will see the terrible map I made to show these emerging zones, and I'll talk a little bit more about their characteristics from a bioregional perspective and from a survival perspective, because they're both important. Look at the maps I'm going to put up of the video. If anyone wants to help me make them better, I need help, because I am okay with data analysis. I'm okay with science communication. I have all the evidence here that I'm not good at art. Pittsburgh, yes, go to Pittsburgh. It's good. It's gonna get like hotter and grosser, but it is probably going to increase in value tremendously because it has enough infrastructure, and it's not going to get like super hot and gross like Philadelphia. Philadelphia is the only major city in Pennsylvania that's going to need a massive infrastructure upgrade, and look really good next to New York, because New York State has to do so much infrastructure upgrade here. How's it going to be able to afford it? It's going to make Philadelphia look good by comparison if they can get some public transit going on there. Sean Mason, you wanted to know what can be done at a local level about wildfire threats. There is actually a lot you can do to protect your home from wildfire. I went to this awesome learning with one of the chiefs in the California Department of Natural Resources. Stephanie, look up the 42nd parallel and get above the 42nd parallel is a good short list. The very bottom of Iowa is where it happens. You're going to be able to survive in most of the United States, but if you want to survive in something that feels like the United States today, get north of there. Okay, keeping your home safe from fire. Most homes that burn, they burn because an ember came in the window or down the chimney. So if you're able to seal your home and have a home sealing routine that you go through when you run your disaster drills, your home is dramatically less likely to burn. The other thing that you can do is make sure that there are margins between plantings and your home. These sound like very small things, but homes that have had both of those safety precautions in place are so much less likely to burn. California has been working hard to promote that information. Are all the US islands doomed to flooding? Maya, tell me more about what you mean by US islands. Because, like, not all of the, I'm trying to remember, not all of the Outer Banks are going to flood. And many of the islands off of Maine are going to be fine. And almost none of the islands in Puget Sound have, like, anything. Brian, Maine's doing pretty good. I mean, it's got problems. The coast is going to have some changes, but it is much less dramatic than down here. And once you get into inland Maine, excellent conservation zone. Maya, I'm sorry to say that Guam, Samoa, and Puerto Rico look pretty rough. I was able to get good data on Puerto Rico because it's the only one of them that's large enough to do modeling. You know, this modeling only goes down to a certain level, right? Like, you can't look at like a square block, you got to look at a few square miles. Puerto Rico has real challenges related to loss of rainfall. That, even more than the sea level rise, is going to be the big problem for the islands, is the access to fresh water and the fact that the sea level rise will probably cause saline incursion of the groundwater. All right. I think maybe I rambled on for long enough. I think I answered everybody's questions. And I'm really happy that we were here and we talked so long. And I'm going to make a video that is better than this to convey this information about the future climactic zones. And I hope you don't take away from this that this is like a terrifying outlook. It is scary, but it's something we can face. It is scary, but it's a tremendous land area where we will be able to fit a lot of people and build a good life. I think that we could, if we move towards a more plant-based diet, especially, feed a tremendous amount of Americans a pretty typical American diet out of this lump, and that we would be able to continue food exports if we can get the Southeast onto neotropical crops. Let's hope. Thanks for the time, guys. Thanks for being here. Bye.